Luke, I love the John Wick universe. This Continental series is great. Look, taking place in the 70s has to change things. But can you talk to me about crafting the iconic sounds of John Wick in the Continental?
Sure. The sounds of John Wick, I've been a part of John Wick from the beginning. And I love it. It's my favorite universe, honestly, to have been a part of. And it's got its own sound. It's got its otherworldly elements that we put into it, where we're always trying to make the world something different. Yeah, environments themselves, we're adding tones to them, things that might make it feel like it's breathing, or otherworldly sounds that are just not natural to the environment that they're in. And then, of course, there's the sound of the action itself, the John Wick action, and that's something I like to call. It's not a coined phrase or anything, but I personally like to call it like precision violence. And that is something it's articulate. We want each moment to have its own impact and be felt, and to do a really good job matching the choreography that's so well crafted. And so we have to be very precise about how we do that. And then on top of it, it's violent. It's a fun violence. It's kind of a graphic novel, violence, with sometimes even a little bit of, humor, notched in just to alleviate the element of it being of all of those headshots we see.
Right. Now, did you take any elements of Winston from the John Wick films and incorporate that into the Continental?
Not so much sonically Winston himself. He's a very kind of unmoving, stable person. So there's not too much with that actual character that we would necessarily create to change and carry over necessarily. Yeah.
Now, can you talk to me about the audio cues specifically for the gunshots, for the sound of the good guy gunshots and the bad guy gunshots? And are there any other sounds that we can identify as being good or bad guy centric?
Sure. Yeah. Well, when it comes to crafting guns, what we usually do, we have the hero gun, as we call it. And that is the gun, of our hero, especially if the hero is, very, very more than capable. So we make that sound more powerful and bigger than we would the bad guy guns. And we do that by the layers in which we work with. We try to have the actual gun they're using themselves, but we're also crafting other things that might give a gun more punch, or a more accent, sharpness to it, weight. And then we're, of course, as well incorporating the room itself. And as we want the gun also to sound natural, we're doing things we build these guns in layers. So every time the gun fires, we're changing the sounds of the layers a little bit here and there, so it doesn't sound like a repeating gunshot over and over. We want it's got to feel natural. And then there's additional things we'll do where, like, if the gunshot's really close to the screen, we're hearing the sound as well of just even the trigger, the dry fire of the gun right before the actual shot occurs. Plus we'll hear probably a shell eject. And those add a little bit of additional clarity that's right in your face. And of course, in addition to that, you got bullet shells that land for every gunshot. So there's a lot of work that goes into crafting those sounds.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it has to be a ton of work crafting those sounds. Now, did you have to create a different soundscape for having the era being set in the 1970s, like the sound of the cars from the 70s, or even the guns from the 70s?
Absolutely. Like cars themselves is, from the 70s, they are bigger, throaty, heavier cars, and they need to have that sound. We can't throw in any high whiny electric vehicles or anything. but it's also got to have grit because the show itself has a lot of grit. We were very mindful in making sure the vehicles for the Continental were, were that of vehicles from the 70s and had that sound to them. And even guns, just more mindful of making sure we're not using things that are too modern sounding, too overly mechanical, that too suppressory, like, unless we're making something fun out of it. We'll break the laws a little bit more, since it's more about the sound of the John Wick action that we want to make sure we maintain for things like guns. But for other things, the environment and vehicles and stuff like that, yes, we're definitely making sure that we're using sounds that were heard in that era.
Now, the Continental, as we know, takes place in the 1970s. The John Wick films, for the most part, take place in the modern day. Are there any other eras of the John Wick universe you think would be cool to explore, since you have done the 70s in this world now?
I think any era. The 80s would be fun. You got the 90s. Heck, you could go back.
You can go way back when?
The 20s, yeah. And wherever you want to go. I think one thing that's even so wonderful about John Wick, the world of John Wick, even as the present, as they've established, is they've kind of, what's been established is kind of a timeless world. A lot of the sounds we use, even in the modern world of John Wick, are a mixture of modern and analog and antique sounds, all to kind of make it feel like it doesn't necessarily exist in one place. Like, this world has kind of been this underworld forever, and they, they're not necessarily changing how they operate due to where we're at in our current present timeline.
Right. Now, the Continental has so many great needle drop moments. How do you weave the sound design into some of those musical cues?
That was a lot of fun, especially because sometimes in shows you'll get these needle drops, and the inclination will be, oh, turn down all of the effects, just play the needle drop. But Albert wanted it to be so immersive that we spent a lot of time designing sounds to work with these needle drops. And that included pitching things, changing the time and tempo to make sure would be in sync with the music. We actually had a live spreadsheet that the post-production department gave us that would update every time one of these needle drops was licensed. It's a go. So then I could go, oh, great, now I can start on this. Almost all of the needle drops were designing, like changing the pitch, the sound of the subway horns, having Foley do things in time and sync with the music. My favorite is actually in Night 3. There's the song "One Is the Loneliest Number" by Three Dog Night, and I designed this fun elevator that moves a little differently. The mechanics are clanking along with the electronic keyboard of the song. And then as he steps out and we hear these cool, fun, heavy footsteps, we've also got cool, these pipes, like airs and waters moving through these pipes in this funky hallway. And I designed that so it would create a false rise with the phrase of the music, and then continue to rise as the character Cormac then opened this cool vault door. And these were all really, and it played up. And those are really fun and unique things that, we were able to do with using sound design along with music to enhance the experience.
That is incredible. Now, when I was preparing for this is the first time I felt like I was really conscious of listening to the sounds in the film. But when your job is done right, we don't really notice all your hard work. What were some of the more trickier aspects of sound design in the world of the Continental?
Well, it's all of these little things. Like Albert loved to make a moment out of the smallest things, be it a light switch, be it a transitional moment, taking us from one location to another, one moment to another. So there was this constant And then the world itself, he wanted it to be like, especially New York City, to be constantly active. And when you have that, when you have all of those things, there's that management of all of the stuff, so it still feels like it lives within the world, and we want to make sure it doesn't sit on top of dialogue. So you have all of these elements that you have to put together to support and help tell the story. But at the same time, you're being mindful. What is the story? What is the focus? How are we taking our audience? And in doing so, you want to make sure that then if there's anything that's not helping to support that story, you're getting rid of it, because you don't want it to be a distraction. So it was definitely challenging in the sense that he wanted it to be so sonically immersive, which is wonderful for us as storytellers in the sound world, but also to make sure, okay, we're doing our jobs. We're not stepping on anything, and we are moving sound in direction of supporting the story.
Right. Now, what are some of the strangest sounds that you had to build for the Continental?
Strangest sounds. Well, some of the probably more otherworldly elements, and subjective stuff. Like we did a lot of transitional sound design or subjective stuff where he liked to kind of go into somebody's headspace for a minute. And he always called that the warble, where we went into the headspace of a character at some given moment. But there'd also be elements where we had to do, take audiences in and out of moments. One of the elements we created was this thematic pulsing sound that we use throughout in a lot of moments, from the very beginning to then another kind of crazy car chase we have later on. And another challenge behind that was Albert likes to create a lot of spaces in what he calls blackness, where you get these black screen moments for a second, and then it's sound's job then to tell the story. So that was also part of the challenges involved in needing to conceptualize something that functioned, and these sounds often had to have, they weren't necessarily literal sounds that we were making. They were these subjective sounds that kind of work like music, these rises and hits and whoosh and other tonal elements that we're designing to take us in and out of these places.
Adding to that, can you talk about the process of creating a signature soundscape for each for specific locations within the world of the Continental?
Sure. So there's New York City. That's more about just making sure it kind of felt like New York City in the 70s, and being mindful of what was all active then, and making sure our locations were right. We wanted Chinatown to sound different than the other areas of town. There's then the space at his uncle's house that we had this really cool overhead bridge, and we wanted that to feel eerie and had other kind of interesting mechanical industrial pulsing that was going along there with other distant train sounds. So location to the location, things were different. The Continental itself, we wanted to kind of introduce cool tones into, and then that hotel, that it had its own voice, and we had fun little chimes that would go off depending upon what was happening. So we had these neat little hotel chimes we introduced, and then you have the escape pod, which was really fun, a very kind of unique thing that we got to build, and that had its own life to it as well. It even had kind of this breathing train like old fashioned pulse that we had and designed to that thing. The sound of the building, tearing itself about. Defense Yonam itself was this really cool, unique thing that we got to do with when it came to using the older, more almost analog like early digital computers with these cool tubes and liquid that's changing, basically creating this structure that's about to tear itself apart. And that was fun living in the world of that, is trying to develop these things that all help play a part in creating these spaces and moments.
That's awesome. Now, do projects within the world of the Continental stand out from other projects you worked on, either in the soundscapes themselves or the process to build them?
I mean, we want every project to be different. You always want to go in the mindset of what's something, new and different that we can do with this world. But it definitely stands out in the sense that it was a very sound intensive project. There was always something going on, always something additive like that we're doing sonically to, establish the world, but also move the audience through the world, and hit, storylines and transitional things, stylistic things that Albert did that were really fun and unique. So as far as that kind of thing, it was definitely more of a sound intensive project than some of the other things I've worked on.
That's amazing. Now, the last question I have for you is, what was the most difficult episode for you to do for the sound design, and what was your favorite to do? And are they the same?
Oh, gosh, that's both 1 and 3 were very difficult and challenging for their own reasons. 3 is just a beast as far as when you think of, like, it's a movie, it's an action movie. And there's all this kind of start, stop, different action set pieces that they're doing. Of course, as well as the defensionum parts, the tearing apart of the hotel, the introduction of the pod, the gunplay, the battles with the Hansel and Gretel twins, the explosions. There's so much variety in what we're doing. And then there's the gunfight that happens in Blackness. So, I mean, that's probably that episode was probably the meat, as far as that one took the most amount of time, and was also a lot of fun. But the first episode was also challenging because that was our establishing episode. And that's where you're having to go, okay, that's where you're having to start all of your building blocks. And it also had, a lot of challenges, like the first 10-minute, chunk of the show is a very fun and exciting and sound intensive moment. So that was a huge build. And then we also had another scene, that car chase that occurs, that car chase is pretty much entirely sound design with a little bit of dialogue. There's only a couple seconds of music at the very beginning and a couple seconds at the very end, and everything else was sound. And that was actually the first thing we worked on. As we hadn't received any of the cuts yet. That was the first thing that Albert wanted to attack, as he felt sound was so important to it. But it was all a lot of fun, and he and the Kirk Ward, the showrunner, and the picture department, Ron and Armin, they did such a phenomenal job putting together already a director's cut with a ton of ideas that helped my crew and I a bunch when it came to going, oh, okay, I understand what you guys are doing, and then Albert was very much an enthusiast of pushing it further and pushing it to kind of its extremes. And that was a lot of fun.
Well, that's incredible. Well, look, congratulations on the Continental. The show was incredible. Thank you so much for your time, Luke. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.